Welcome to the video for order of operations and evaluating expressions. To start this video, we're going to go over what PEMDAS stands for. So next to each of the letters, you're going to write what it stands for. So the first one is P. P is for parentheses. Then the E stands for exponents. The M and D are written next to each other because these mean multiplication and division. They're written next to each other because we handle them equivalently. They are treated equal left to right. So when we look for multiplication and division, we look for them at the same time and look from left to right. The AS, again, written next to each other because they are treated equally, stand for that addition and subtraction, and they are again handled from left to right. Okay, so example 1 here, we're going to go through and use PEMDAS to make sure that we follow order of operations. So when I look, the first thing I look for is parentheses. There are a set of parentheses where I see a -9 in the parentheses. But -9 is by itself in the parentheses, so there's really nothing we can do within those parentheses. So now I'm going to look for exponents. I don't see any exponents. So now, starting at the left side, I'm going to look for multiplication or division. The first thing I see is this division, 72 divided by 9. So I'm going to do that division first. 72 divided by 9 gives me, so then I bring everything else down. So the 8 is from 72 divided by 9, but then I bring down the plus 4 times -9. So now I'm again going to look to see what is the next thing I need to do for order of operations. The next thing that I see is this multiplication. Because again, we're looking for multiplication and division left to right. We already did the division, so now we're going to multiply 4 times the -9. 4 times -9 gives me the -36. And I just like to kind of keep negatives in parentheses, so that's why you see that still in a parenthesis. And then 8 plus -36 gives us our answer of -28. And that was just because, again, going through the order of operations, when I look for the next thing was addition or subtraction, treated equal left to right, and so that's where that 8 plus -36 came in. So then go ahead and put a circle around that. Okay, so the next example, we're looking at 66 plus -16 times 3 divided by 6. First thing I look for is parentheses. So in the parentheses, I see a -16. Nothing I can do with that, so we're going to move past parentheses. Exponents, there are no exponents. Multiplication and division, again, looking left to right. So when I go from the left side, the first thing I see is this -16 times the 3. So that's the first thing that I'm going to do. Everything else gets brought down. So the 66 plus -16 times 3 gave me that -48. That's why you see that there. And then divided by 6. So again, looking through, still looking for multiplication and division left to right. So now I'm going to do the division, -48 divided by 6, to give us the -8. -48 divided by 6 is -8. So now I brought down the 66, because I haven't done anything with that yet, plus, and this division gave me the -8. So now I can finally look. The last thing I see here is addition. So I'm going to do 66 plus a -8, which gives me 58, and that's my final answer. Make sure you put a circle around that to indicate that is your final answer. Let's try the last example. Example number 3, we see here, we're looking for, the first thing is parentheses. So when I look at the parentheses, I see two things happening. It's an 8 squared plus a -9. So within these parentheses, I have to go through the PEMDAS again. So I don't see another set of parentheses, but I do see an exponent. So the first thing that I'm going to do is actually the 8 squared. 8 squared, remember, is the same as 8 times 8, which gives me 64. So I'm going to rewrite this. So now the 45 is going to come down -7 times 4 minus, and then in the parentheses, the only thing that's changed so far is 8 squared became that 64. So now in parentheses, I still have parentheses, so I'm still on that first step. So within this parentheses, now I'm going to do the 64 plus a -9. Now, you don't have to put the little squiggle underneath. It's just my way of kind of showing you what I'm doing to try to help you stay organized. But if it helps you stay organized, you can certainly do that. Or you could use a bracket or like little arrows, whatever you want to do to just kind of show that this is what we are doing. Okay, so now 64 plus negative 9 gives me 55. So I'm going to rewrite it with the 55 in place of what was in parentheses. So now I can keep the 55 in parentheses, but I don't really need it, so I got rid of them at this point because it's not like I need to keep a negative in parentheses or anything like that. So I just did 64 plus negative 9, gave it a 55, replaced that with what was in the parentheses. So now I have 45 minus 7 times 4 minus 55. The next thing I would do, so we did parentheses, there's no exponents anymore, multiplication and division is next, we go left to right. So the next thing that I see is 7 times 4. Now, the sign in front tells me that that 7 is a negative, so I like to think of this as a negative 7 times 4. You could also leave it as 7 times 4 and just do that multiplication and have the subtraction come down. Either way would give you the same answer. Negative 7 times 4 gives me a negative 28, and then I still have the negative 55, so minus 55 at the end here. Okay, so now I'm looking for addition and subtraction, again going left to right. So when I start at the left side, I see subtraction first, 45 minus 28. So I'll do that first, which gives me 17. And then finally I'll do the 17 minus the 55. The minus 55 came down to get my final answer of negative 38. And that is my answer. I'm going to put a circle around, negative 38. Okay, so those are our examples on order of operations. Okay, so now we're going to look at the evaluating expressions. In order to evaluate each of the expressions, I need to fill in these x, y's, and z's for you. So in place of the x, we're going to say x equals 4, the y equals negative 3, and the z equals 6. So knowing those three pieces, you need to fill that in the top so that we can then fill in each of the examples. Okay, so example number 1 says z minus x. Now instead of putting in z, when I sub in, I always use parentheses, but instead of typing in the z, we know z is equivalent to 6. So I can type in a 6 minus, because that's what we see in between the z and the x. And then instead of x, we know from up above the x is 4, so I can replace that with a 4. So this really becomes in parentheses the 6 minus, and then in parentheses the 4, which really is no different than just 6 minus 4. The parentheses are super helpful when we have negatives and when we're dealing with multiplication, but in this case, it's really just the same as doing 6 minus 4. 6 minus 4 gives us 2, so my final answer is 2. That's what this z minus x equates to when I use the x, y, and z from up above. All right, let's look at another example. So in this example, we have a negative y. So when we think of this negative y, it's really, the negative is like multiplying by a negative 1. So you can kind of think of this as a negative 1 times the y. So if we do a negative 1 and the y is negative 3, that's a negative 1 times a negative 3, or the opposite of negative 3. So a negative 1 times a negative 3 actually makes this become a positive 3. The opposite of negative 3 is positive 3. And then in place of the z, we're going to put in the 6. So then we have 3 minus 6. 3 minus 6, if we put that in our calculator, gives us a final answer of negative 3. So 3 minus 6 is negative 3. Negative y minus z gives us that negative 3. Hopefully that made sense. Let's try another example. Okay, so example 3, we have the y plus and then a negative x. So in place of the y, we're going to sub in the negative 3. And then again, we have this negative x. That's kind of like thinking of a negative 1, and the x is 4. Negative 1 times 4 gives me just that negative 4. Or again, you can think of that as the opposite if you would prefer. Either way, we're going to have a negative 4. Now this time I am going to put that in parentheses because I need to remember that I'm adding a negative. So when I do negative 3 plus a negative 4, I get an answer of negative 7. And that's my answer for that one. Okay, example 4, so instead of z, we know that z is equivalent to 6. Now this is a similar situation where I could put the 6 in parentheses so I can see that it's the 6 divided by 4. But it really is no different than doing 6 divided by 4, which when we do that in our calculator we get 1 and 5/10. So 1.5 is what that looks like. And that's the answer you're going to put a circle around. Okay, now we're going to look at a word problem. So in this word problem, example 1 says the highest recorded temperature on Earth was recorded in Africa at 136 degrees Fahrenheit, while the lowest was negative 129 degrees Fahrenheit in Antarctica. And can you see how this negative kind of got stuck up here? So because of that negative not really showing where next to the 129, I'm going to ask that you put in a negative next to the 129 degrees Fahrenheit, so you know it's actually a negative value in Antarctica. What is the range of temperatures recorded on Earth? So now I need to look through, I read it once, and then I like to go back and highlight, okay, what's important here? Well, that word range, in order to answer this question, I have to know what range means. So to find the range, we need to subtract the high minus the low, which then makes sense because my question was telling me that the highest temperature is 136 degrees Fahrenheit, and that the lowest temperature is negative 129 degrees Fahrenheit. So when I need to write an expression, I need to make the high minus the low as my expression. So what that looks like is the 136 minus and then the negative 129. So when we actually type that in our calculator, that will give us an answer maybe different than what you expected, because that minus and negative actually is like addition. So when we put that in our calculator, we get 265. Now the explanation part is where we need to explain what that number means. So that's where normally I'll go through and I'll underline that question. At the end of this, the question actually wanted us to find what is the range of temperatures recorded on Earth. So my answer is actually going to say the range is 265 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's my answer, making sure we have that label and that the answer makes sense to the question that was asked. Okay, another word problem we're going to do together. So this example 2 says, you have a debt of $200. 5 of your friends offer to pay off all of the debt. How much does each friend need to equally pay in order to pay off the full debt? So I'm looking through to highlight important information. I see a debt of $200. And then I see I have 5 friends offering to pay off my debt. The question is, how much does each friend need to equally pay? So that part is important too, because I'm going to underline it because it's my question. I always want to come back to that at the end and see if I answered my question. So how much does each friend need to pay? But that equally part means that they need to make sure that when I split this, they're going to equally pay it off. They don't want one friend to pay more than the others. So my expression needs to take that into account. So the debt part. What that debt part means is I'm actually going to have a negative 200 in my expression. I have a debt of 200. To figure out what each friend is going to pay, I need to take that negative 200 and divide it equally. Equally means I need to divide by those 5 friends. So when I do that, negative 200 divided by 5, my answer is negative 40. But when I talk about an answer, a negative 40 doesn't really mean much. What does that mean for the question? Well, how much does each friend need to equally pay in order to pay off the full debt? That negative 40 tells me each friend will pay $40. Okay, so you need to make sure that you write that exactly how it's written there. Each friend will pay not negative 40, but they will each pay $40. All right, that was it for the first video. Hopefully this will help you to complete the homework, which is the back of this sheet of paper, the B's worksheet on the back. So you're going to try those questions all on your own. All right, have a good day. Bye.